Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam, Hilchos, Kiddush, HaChodesh, Prakim Tes, Yud, and Yud Aleph, and we will be starting with Perek Tes. Now, we're going to be discussing in chapters 9 and 10 the exact length of a solar year. We already made mention that in Chazal we have the Machloikes, which we attribute to Shmuel, the greatest Hamoida, Shmuel the doctor, Shmuel the astronomer, that Shmuel had an opinion regarding the length of a solar year versus Rab Ada, who had a more exact length, which was actually a little bit less than the length of Shmuel. We also mentioned already that normally, even though we have many different arguments in Chazal, when it comes to halacha, you paskin like one opinion. And as Chassidus explains, that Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. In every world, you have the Torah. And in every world, someone's opinion is the correct opinion. Devar havai zu halacha means that in this physical world, only one opinion stands. Here we'll find something which is extraordinary, unique, which is that we're going to paskin both like Shmuel and like Rabbi. Okay, now, we also made mention to the Tkufa. For example, in the context of why would we make a year into a leap year when we had a Sanhedrin? And we explained that it's that important for the vernal equinox to already have begun, for the sun to have hit the vernal equinox by the 15th of Nisan. If the vernal equinox only is on the 16th of Nisan, that in itself is a reason to add another to give more time to the sun to catch up to where it needs to be for the Yom Tov of Pesach. That is what we spoke of. So I want to quickly speak now about the 4 Tkufas, the 4 seasons. This is completely and exclusively connected to the movement of the sun. Again, as we mentioned, just quickly to repeat it, that even though from our perspective means when you're living on planet Earth, a person were to ask you, how often does the sun make a full circle around the sky? You're going to answer 24 hours. And that's an MS answer. From my perspective, every 24 hours, let's say noon, the sun is on top of my head. Tomorrow noon, the sun will be on top of my head. And that's because it made a full circle going through all the 360 degrees in the Galgal. MS. Take out planet Earth. You're not on planet Earth. Look at the 9th Galgal vis-a-vis the sun. So the earth is in the center. The earth, relative to everything else, is stationary. You have, right above the earth, you have the first Galgal, which is a sphere. A sphere is not something that Goyim speak about. A sphere is a 360 circle of a non-existence existence, something that we call outer space, but it's something that's wrapping itself around all of the planet Earth. The depth of the Galgal varies one to the other. And in that Galgal, Hashem affixed the moon. Actually, we're going to learn later that it's a lot more complicated when it comes to the moon. The moon really, the Galgal of the moon itself is comprised of 4 Galgalim. And the 4 themselves is really 3 and 1, as we'll see later. But generally, there's the Galgal of the moon. Now we have what we call the 7 moving planets, the Shiva Koich V'Lachas. Right, the closest one to the Earth is the Levana. The farthest from the Earth is Shapsai, is Saturn. Each one has its own Galgal. Once you go out of the Galgal of Saturn, Chazal, for our purposes, grouped all of the trillions of stars that occupy tremendous amount of space in the outer space. All of that is what we call the 8th Galgal. Since all of the Galgalim are transparent, from planet Earth, when you look up, you can see the sum total of all of them together. And people noticed that in the belt, as we'll go in greater detail later, of the Galgalim, the stars appear to form certain images. And simply for us to have a common point of reference, we named those images. Now listen to this step. This step is mystically very important. we project all of this imagery of the total of the 7 and the 8th Galgal, of all of the 8th Galgalim, we project it to that which is beyond the 8th Galgal, and we're calling that the 9th Galgal. So there is this 9th Galgal, which has not a single star in it, but since everything is transparent, we are able to project the imagery of the 8th Galgalim into the 9th. And when we speak about the movement of the sun, that it goes around once a year, we're speaking about the sun vis-a-vis the 9th Galgal. Because imagine you are in the 9th Galgal, and you're going to look down. Compared to you, the sun is moving only 1 degree a day. Not only that, if you're in the 9th Galgal and you're looking down at the sun, the sun is moving from west to east, not from east to west. It's moving from west to east every day around 1 degree. Being that we are placing, so to say, different sections in the 9th Galgal. It's a 360 degree, but every 30 degrees is going to be named by those images, by those mazolos that we call, that appear in it when you project it in it. So it helps you give an address. Imagine you're going through a city, but there are no streets and there are no numbers to the houses. Imagine that. So where are you? I'm here. Like there's no point of reference. Naming, dividing the 9th Galgal into 360 degrees, allowing for every 30 degrees to be named by a certain mazel. Because in it, if you project in it, you have the image of that ram of the Tleh, or that which is on Nisan. Or if you're going into Tishrei, the image of the Moiznayim, of the scales. And as we'll go through the other names as we get into today's 11th chapter. So this gives us a reference of where the sun is at. Intro number two. Every sphere has an equator. Every sphere has, so if you have a ball, right? So you're going to put the north and the southern tips, and then you're going to have the equator. The equator of the 9th Galgal is not directly above the equator of the earth. At some point later, I know ideally it now would have been the time, I'm going to show you on a globe what that looks like. That the equator of the Galgalim is not directly over the equator of the earth, which means that when the sun is traveling 1 degree in the 9th Galgal, relative to the 9th Galgal, a day, it's not going always above the equator of the earth. If the sun always would have been above the equator of the earth, then every place in the earth would have had the same temperature every day in the year. Why do we have sometimes winter? The main reason is because from the mazel of Tleh, which is from the Tkufa of Nisan, all the way until Moiznayim, the sun is going to be in the northern side of the equator. It's traveling under the mazalis, but the mazalis themselves, like we mentioned, is not over the equator. It's going to be going from the month of Nisan every day 1 degree, not only from west to east, but a little bit towards the north. And it's going to keep on moving towards the north until it comes to the center of the summer. When it comes to the center of the summer, it stops going further north, and that is 23.5 degrees. And it's going to now start going back towards the south. It's still on the northern part of the equator, but at least it's getting closer and closer towards the equator, and then it's going to move over into the south. When the sun is entering the mazel of Tleh, that means it's exiting where it was in winter in the south, and it's now going to start going to the north. That is what's called the vernal equinox. The word equinox means it's the time where day and night are equal. That's the type of equinox. And vernal means spring. When it hits the furthest most part of the north vis-a-vis the equator, which is 23.5 degrees, that is what we call the Tkufa of Tammuz. It's entering the mazel of Sarton, and the Goyim call this the summer solstice. The word solstice means it's standing still. It's no longer going to be going further to the north. That's it. And it begins going back towards the south, but it's still on the northern part of the equator. When it comes to the Tkufa of Tishrei, we call that Tkufa Skrifti. That's called the autonomal equinox. Again, it's going to be on top of the equator, where the day and the night will be exact the same, half and half. And now it's going to start going towards the south. Now, if I live north of the equator and the sun is in the southern part of the sky, I'm going to have winter. I'm going to have winter because the sun is far away from me. It's not warming me up enough. Aside of the fact that the days will be shorter, we're going to explain that another time. When it comes all the way to Teves, which is what the Goyim call the winter solstice, that is where the sun is the farthest in the southern part of the equator in the sky, 23.5 degrees to the south. Solstice, it stops over there, and now it's going to begin going again the same 1 degree every day from west to east. It's only going 1 degree a day. The movement vis-a-vis the mazel, the galgalachi is exactly the same every day, but its placement concerning the center of the equator, it's going to be going north, south, and you're going to have, every year is going to have 2 equinoxes, the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox, and every year is going to have 2 solstices, the summer and the winter solstice. So these are the 4 seasons. Tkufas Nisan, Tkufas Tammuz, Tkufas Tishrei, and Tkufas Teves. How long is every Tkufa, guys? Well, you have to know what is the exact time that it takes the sun to come back to the same place in Mazel Tov, which is a full year. Take that number and divide it into 4. A fourth is going to be the length of every Tkufa. Now, in halacha, why do we need to know when the Tkufa of Nisan is? What's the halachic nafkamina? I'll tell you guys. Number 1, who knows when we start saying in the davening, the saying Tal Umat Lavracha? The words of the answer is, and now you understand it better, excuse me, not in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, we start saying it on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Speaking about outside Eretz Yisrael, we switch over to the saying Tal Umat Lavracha 60 days after the Tkufa of Tishrei, 60 days after the autumnal equinox. So here, that's a reason. You need to know when every Tkufa begins, to know when to switch over to the same Talamat Lavracha. I'll give you another reason why we have to know when the Tkufa is. Once in every 28 years, we're going to make Birchas Achama. That's something that we're going to touch upon in this chapter, in the 9th chapter. You have to know when the Tkufa is. That's directly related to when you're going to make the Birchas Achama. Concerning these 2 halachas of when do we say V'sein Talamat Lavracha, I know that's concerning the Tkufa of Tishrei, 60 days afterwards, but the Tkufa of Tishrei is directly linked to the Tkufa of Nisan. You have to know when the Tkufa of Nisan is. You have to know how many days to add to begin the Tkufa of Tammuz, how many days to add until you begin the Tkufa of Tishrei, to know when it is, and to add 60 days to say V'sein Talamat Lavracha. To make the cheshbon of Birchas Achama concerning these 2 halachas, we paskin like Shmuel. So Perek Chi is going to give you the length of a solar year, Lishmuel, la halacha, for the 2 things that we mentioned. By the way, the Rambam doesn't make any mention of this chapter of a Saint Talamat Lavracha. I know that, but I want you to know that this is why we are paskening like Shmuel for the 2 dinim. Now, in the next chapter, in Perek Yud, the Rambam is going to then bring the Shita of Rav Ada, which actually holds that the movement of the sun is a little bit slower. It's a little bit slower than Shmuel. We are going to paskin like Rav Ada concerning the topic that we learned in Perek Daled, that when the Sanhedrin sees that the Tkufa of Nisan is going to fall out on the 16th of Nisan and not prior, that in itself is a factor, that's the most powerful factor to make the year into a leap year. And there we won't paskin like Shmuel, we're going to paskin like Rav Ada. Final introduction. This is very important. People ask, if there's a machlokes, Yazelik, how quick does the sun move? People say, how can there be a machlokes? Like, God gave the Torah. God knows the emes. When you're having a machlokes, it's called, can there be a machlokes in Metzias? Can there be a machlokes in a fact? There can be a machlokes in a concept. There can be a machlokes in halacha. There cannot be a machlokes in the fact. But yet we find such a machlokes. The approach is the following. I want you to know that even Rav Ada's number, which is closer to the truth, is also not our truth. It's not our truth. And the Rambam will continuously make the point that the halachic need of knowing astronomy, whether it is to establish a calendar, whether it is for the Sanhedrin to know if the moon is seeable, so when witnesses come, they know whether Bachlal it's shaykh for them to be saying the truth, or we already know that they're lying. And concerning many other halachic questions, when to make Birchas Hachama, when to say V'sein Talamat Lavracha, when to make the year into a leap year, you don't need to have the exact number. You don't need that. Approximation will do the same job. The benefit of approximation is huge, because when you start going into the fractions and the subfractions, every single mathematical cheshbon becomes very, very long. Like, for example, just topic, Shmuel says that it takes the sun 365 days and 6 hours to make a full circle. It's a very rounded number. When you begin with a very rounded number, and every year has 4 seasons. So what's the length of every season? It's very simple, 365 and 6 hours divided by 4. Now, if you're going to start using the numbers of Rabbi Ada, which is a lot more precise, we're going to introduce another fraction that we never had until now. Then when you divide it into 4, it becomes even more fraction. In other words, the cheshbonis become more difficult. They become more complex. And if there is no halachic need, we don't use them. So it's not like Shmuel and Avada are arguing, Taka, how quick does the sun move? They both know, by the way, both numbers, we know today from astronomy, both numbers are very close to the reality, but they're not exact. We don't need exact. Shmuel felt that in halacha, you can even approximate it more and everything will be covered. Avada felt, no, that you have to be a bit more precise. That's why there is a machlokes. But everyone is only holding their opinion not to what is actually the movement, but what numbers could we suffice to use, what approximation is enough in order to come to the halachas that we need. That's the way we understand their machlokes. So without any further ado, we're going to start with the 9th chapter. Again, we're looking for the tkufa, how to establish the tkufa, which really means how long is a solar year. A Perek Shi is going to paskin like Shmuel. Halach Aleph. Shnas Hachama, the solar year. Yesh mechachmi Yisrael. There are some of the Jewish chachamim that say that it's shloish me'es chamisha v'shishim yoim u'reviyah yoim. That it's 365 days and a quarter of a day. What's a quarter of a day? So we learned yesterday, a day is comprised always of 24 hours. Guys, on planet Earth, Kevan, how long is a day? It's wrong to say 24 hours. Depends. It depends. Actually, I take that back. Day and night will always be 24 hours. But that every day has 12 hours day, 12 hours night. On planet Earth, that's not true. Concerning what we're learning now, it is true. Because we're not focusing at all of what the day appears here on the planet Earth. We're speaking about if you were to be out there, you're in the 9th Galgal, and you're looking down at the sun, it's a whole different thing. You're not going to have a sunrise and a sunset. There is no Earth, there is no rise and no set. Simply the sun is moving, but the sun is not moving linear, the sun is moving in a circle. And like we explained yesterday, the moment something is moving in a circle, so then when you come to the beginning point, you can erase all of the prior numbers and begin with number 0 all over again. That's the circle movement. And where is it? Divide the sphere into 360. Every 30 degrees has in it another image from the stars. Give it that name, just to have a reference point. And the sun now is in the mazel of Teleh. The sun then will be in the next mazel. Just where is it? Okay. That it takes, I take it back. No, I'm sorry. Ada holds that the sun is moving a bit quicker. In other words, it finishes the full circle in less than that quarter of a day, in less than the 6 hours, by fractions, but still, it's a different cheshbon. And then Rambam writes, normally we don't even mention them. Here we are mentioning them. That the Goyish Chachamim, whether it are the Greeks, whether it is the Persians, that they mastered astronomy, they also had the same machlokes. Now, I want to add something. Why did they have a machlokes? Because the Rambam is going to write later, who knew all this? This is something only God can know. You look today, when people are trying to figure things out scientifically, which means milmata lamayla, means they look at reality and they're trying to figure out how did it come to be the way it is. They didn't come to this yet. The Goyim don't have this type of astronomy. It's amazing. This is something that God taught. This is the way it works. It's a whole different universe according to the Torah, which is the emes. So they had a machloikas because they learned it from us. We had a machloikas, like we explained, not because we didn't know the exact movement. We knew that. It was not relevant la halacha. For halacha, you could approximate to make life simpler.
Okay. All right, the camps, was it the camp where the Jews were around the Mishkan, was it set up according to the Mazalot or according to their names? Or
You're saying good. And what you need to do is you have to learn Sefer Yetzirah that makes a phenomenal, this is Torah, correlation between the 12 tribes and the 12 constellations, and that answers a lot. And the center of everything, Kevin, is the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan. Right. And the reason why the earth is in the center of everything is because on the earth there's got to be a Beis HaMikdash. B'diuk. Halacha Beis. Mishu Oime. Now let's go. Halacha Beis. Mishu Oime Shudav Yayoim, which is Shmuel. It's a very rounded number, 365 and a quarter of a day. So now, if you remember that in the 6th chapter, Halacha Yud, the Rambam, when he's trying to simplify the cheshbonos of the moilad. So of course, once he gave you the time between one moilad and the other, you can always know when every moilad is going to be. But then, but they didn't have calculators then. So sometimes you have to jump ahead 4,000 years. So you can go month by month by month by month by month. So the simplest system that Rambam made is he made what we call a machzir of 19 years, but 19 years that have in it 12 simple years and 7 leap years. And then he says that after those 19 years, you almost come back to the same place, almost. Then Rambam and Halacha Yud mentioned that there's going to be a surplus, there's going to be a new number when it comes to the soul, to the sun. Now we're going to come back to that. Then this is the number that we learned in chapter 6. Sha'achas, 1 hour, and other than that little change, your mamash back where you started, which is very good, Kevin. So now, why did we need to know that? I'll tell you why. Because if I know when the Tkufa was during the year of creation, and I want to know when the Tkufa is right now, I don't even have to look in the heavens. I don't have to look in the heavens to see where the sun is. I simply have to add for every year. But instead of going year by year, I can jump 19 years. But whenever you jump on 19 years, you're going to have this difference that you're going to have to adjust. The year, now, same thing. Every year has 4 seasons, like we mentioned. So how long is each season? Well, according to Shmuel, you're beginning with a very rounded number. You're beginning with 365 and a quarter. So let's divide that into 4. You can take out your calculator. The year, bein kol tkufa del tkufa, echad v'tishim yoim, u'sheva shoyis v'chatzi shah. And therefore, the Rambam says, now that you know the length of a year, so you can divide it into 4, you know the length of each tkufa. You know the length, you know how much will the sun rotate in 19 years. So you're almost back where it began. You only have to make that little adjustment. So once you know any tkufa, knowing when that day was in the week and what hour it was, now you can go frontwards, you can go backwards. Kufas Nisan, and we defined the Kuf of Nisan in the Goyim call it the vernal equinox. That's the time where the sun is finally exiting the southern side of the equator. It's now right above the equator in the direction of starting to go towards the north. And the Kuf of Tammuz, right, which is the Shemesh is now beginning to enter the Mazel of Sarton. This is called the summer solstice. That's where the sun is no longer going to be going further north. It already traveled 23.5 degrees from the equator, but it ain't going anymore. And then it starts to weave back towards the equator. It's going now towards the south, but it's on the northern part of the sky. And the next kufa is what we call kufas Tishrei, which is what they're going to call the autonomal, right, the autumn equinox. Hey, at the beginning of the Mazel of Maznayim. Again, now it's mamash right above the equator. So equinox, half day, half night, 12 hours day, 12 hours night, even on planet Earth. And then finally it's going into the south, which is why if you live in the north, it's going to get colder and colder. And now we're beginning with the Tkuf of Teves. And the Tkuf of Teves, the winter solstice, is when the Shemesh is Bereis Mazel Gadim. So says the Rambam, I want to give you the number. You only need to know when one Tkufa happened. Kufas Nisan Hoysa, Vishana Rishoina Shel Yitzira, the first year that the world was created. Now we learned yesterday the world was created in Tishrei. Let's go with that. So when the world was created in Tishrei, that's the autumnal, that's in the equinox. The sun is traveling now towards the south. When did the sun finally, for the first time, hit the vernal equinox? When did it hit the equator going towards the north? It happened, L'fi Cheshbon Zeh, Choilad Moilad Nisan. It actually took place before the Moilad. Right? We learned yesterday about the Moilad. Now we're gonna compare it to the Moilad. It happened 7 days, 9 hours, 642 halakim. Prior to the Moilad, Simana Zat Karma Halacha Dalid. Now Now this is the cheshbon that Rambam is going to give in this chapter. Actually, 2 cheshbonos. The first one will be more complex. Then the Rambam is going to give a very vague, simple one. Sometimes the vague and simple is good enough. That's the whole point that we made. That halacha approximates and even makes more approximations and simplifying things, because you don't need to make it complicated for certain halachas. But let's begin with the relatively more complex one, which is now halacha dalat, halacha hey, kachi. Teidat chilam, hamo, machzoidim, shleimim, b'shnas yitzirad, machzor shetirza. Right, we gave you already the exact kufa, first kufas Nisan in the year of creation. What year are we up right now? Don't add every year the difference between one year and the other. Don't do that. Don't add 365 and a quarter. Why not? Because you have to do it again and again and again and again and again. Jump every 19 years. We already said that the machzer brings you back and only make that adjustment. The number that we gave, again, in Peirik Vav Halacha Yud, that Rambam just repeated before, 1 hour and ba'arba me'ez v'chamisha shonim chalakim. The kabetz, and gather them all together. We already learned how to do it. You gather the smaller things together, and once you hit, right, you have 1,080 chalakim. Once you hit that number, right, then you add another hour. Once you hit 24 hours, you add another day. Once you hit 7 days, then you add another week, and then you go back to number 0. Shiva yamim. And why is that? And why is that? Because we just mentioned that's the time that in the first year of creation that Kufa happened prior to the Moilad. That's this number. And so one second. In other words, you're going to get, you have to know how many machzoidim of 19 years are you at. So this relatively simple way of only jumping from 19 will only give you the right time of the beginning of this 19-year cycle. But now you have to go year by year. If you want to go every tkufa. So we said every tkufa, according to Shmuel, it's 91 days, 7.5 hours. Then you'll know this year exactly when any one of the 4 tkufas are. The Rambam is being Meramis that we take paskin like Shmuel to know, like we said, when to say the same Talamat Levracha, because we do it 60 days after Tkufas Tishrei. Very good. Like we just mentioned, again, Peirik Vav Halacha Yud, the Rambam already mentioned this twice on this halacha. That is the difference that you have to adjust every 19 years. Why is that? Because that's the difference between a solar year and 12 lunar months, right? Because what are we looking at? We want to know when is the tkufa vis-a-vis the moilad. The moilad, you have to know the moon. The kabetzachor. And now again, since when you began, it began 7 days prior to the moilad. So the tigra mimenu shiva yomim but tesha shoyz v'sheish mizrayim chalakim. And now v'hashar tashlichem chotshi levana. Now you're going forwards. Very good. So we already learned in the previous chapters that a lunar month is 29 days, 12 hours, and the 793 chalakim. Now, v'teida zman kufas nisan shalois hashana. You'll know b'chama yom b'chodesh v'kama shah. You'll know the day of the month and you'll know the hour. Now we're going to get to sometimes people simply want to know what day of the week. We'll get to that in a moment. What day of the week you should know is Negeya for Birchas Hachama. Because Birchas Hachama is only made when the Tkufa when the sun enters Tkufa's Nisan, exactly how it entered during the creation. And when did it enter in creation, guys? Tuesday night going into Wednesday. So it has to be connected to the day of the week. So we're going to get to the day of the week in a moment. Now, Kufas Nisan, Lafi Cheshman Zeh, Eina Lo'olam Ella, according to Shmuel. See, according to Shmuel, there's no fractions. So it's 365 and 6 hours. So it's always going 6 hours. Kufas Nisan Ella B'tchilas Elayla. It's 6 hours. It's either going to be in the beginning of the night, or it's going to be in the middle of the night, or in the beginning of the day, or in the middle of the day. And similarly, since between one Kuf and the other, according to Shmuel, right, is 91, right, in 7.5 hours. So the next one is going to be a half an hour. Kufas Tamas Lo'elam Eina Ella, Oy B'Shem Shoyso Mechza, Oy B'Shah Achas Mechza, B'Yem Yemim Balayla, Kufas Tishri Lo'elam Eina Ella, Oy B'Tesha Shoyz, Oy B'Shah Shoyz, B'Yem Yemim Balayla, Kufas Kefas Lo'elam Eina Ella B'Esher Shoyso Mechza, Oy B'Abu Mechza, B'Yem Yemim Balayla. And now let's go further. If you want to know, not the day of the month, vis-a-vis nach the Moilad, I simply want to know what day of the week and what hour of that day of the week will be the vernal equinox. And that will be Negea, let's say, for Kiddush Achama, for Birchas Achama, once 28 years. So same. Let's go weiter. And Tirza later, Be'ezeh Yom Yashavua. Be'ezeh Shot Yat Kufa. So Kach Shonim Gemurim. Again, Misha Sha'avru Mishnasa Yitzira Achon Shetirza. And now we're making a whole new cycle, guys, when it comes not to compare it to the Moilad, not to the day of the month. When you want to know the day of the week, we're making a whole new cycle. And we're going to make cycles of 28 years, 28 years. Why? Listen, guys, when you want to know the day of the month, the Pedig Vav Halacha Yud, that's the key. Every machzor is of 19 years, and you're almost there in the day of the month. When you want to know the day of the week, you'll see this. Every year, the Tkufa is going to get pushed off 6 hours. Every 28 years, the Tkufa will be exactly on the same day and hour. No, it's the day and the hour will only realign once in 28 years. So now you're making a whole nother type of machzor, which is a unit of 28 years. Now, like we mentioned, according to Shmuel, the Sheisha Ois. The Kabetz HaKoil, and gather and add them all up together. And by the way, you have to add 3 days. Why do you have to add 3 days? You have to add 3 days because the sun was created after 3 days. You're looking for the day of the week. There's no need, right? Every time you hit 7 days, you go back to number 1 again. Why do you add 3 days? Because the Tkufa Rishona Shel Shnas HaYetzira was B'tchilas Leil Revi'i. I want you to know that this in itself, I don't want to get in there right now, but whoever learned with us Gemara Shabbos, Kuf Chav something over there, that Rashi Chaich. The Gemara is also speaking about different types of mazalas. We're speaking about the Shiva Koich V'Leches influences of the world, not the 12 constellations. And if I remember correctly, every hour from the Shiva Koich V'Leches, I forgot, in Milmata Lamayla, Milmayla Lamata, 6 p.m. either got placed Shabtai or got placed the moon. Forgot which one. The Rambam doesn't hold that way. The Rambam holds that the sun was placed, it had to be placed for it to be moving already through the mazalos in the beginning of the night, 6 p.m. Tuesday night, which is the beginning. That's why you need to, if you're looking for the day of the week, you have to begin. That's not, you have to adjust it for these 3 days. Now, halacha, hey, Kate said, for example, Rambam is going to put this in for exercise. That Hadei should have seen a late at Kufas Nisan. Shloshnas, Shloishim, Utsham Meyes, Va'arbas, Alofim Liyetzira. The Rambam is going to year 4,930 from creation. Why does the Rambam picking that number, Kevan? Because it's evident that Rambam wrote these halachas during that year. What's going to be more amazing is that, I think in 2 chapters from now, the Rambam is going to be speaking about 8 years later. And that's because when the Rambam wrote Yad HaChazaka, there was the time that he actually composed it. And then the Rambam reviewed it. And if he made an important emendation at a later year, he would change the year as the example. It's only an example. But anyways, over here, that's the source. That from here we know l'chu'ura that the Rambam wrote the Yad HaChazaka in the year 4930. Which, by the way, we're learning this Tav Shin Pei Gimel. We're learning this 5,000, right? Hey, Tav Shin Pei Gimel, which is exactly 853 years ago. But let's go right. So, if you want to know when will the Tkufas Nisan be, we're talking about what day of the week. Take the sum year of what year are you in right now, and make groups of 28. All you have in addition is 1 year. So it's easy. For every year we say you take 1 day and 6 hours. That's 1 year to the next. Toisav Olav, you have to add the 3 days because again, God created the first Kufas Nisan was going into Wednesday, was Tuesday night, what we call a 6 p.m. Nim says Kufas Nisan will be Beleil Chamishi. We're talking about the day of the week. 6 hours in the night. Now, now you know when Tkufas Nisan will be this year. The Rambam says you want to know when the next Kufa is going to be. You want to know when the summer solstice will be, when Tkufas Tammuz will be. Amachaya, according to Shmuel. Tkufas Tammuz, you have to add 7.5 hours. We're speaking about the day of the week. We're not talking about the day of the month. Another 7.5 hours. It has to be shishi. This is a machlekes inversion, but in their source. Then again, the Rambam is going to give another way of making a simplified cheshbon, but all of this is based on Shmuel's already approximated simplified cheshbon. Now I know that we learned before in halacha dalid, right? A exact way of knowing the day of the month. The Rambam is going to give you a simpler cheshbon. See, the number of the week was very simple. That we learned in Perek Vav. You have to remember Perek Vav. When it comes to this, you have to know the cycle, not of 28, of 19. You see, is not exact, right? It's 10 days and something. Here, the Rambam you see is approximated, because this is an approximated cheshbon. Im Yagiel if that's not the reality, if you're off the reality, this cheshbon will only bring you 1, 2, or 3 days close to it. If this a simplified cheshbon has you off more than 3 days, then you made a mistake. Max. Now, the Yom HaTkufa, you have to know how to make the real cheshbon. I'm just giving you a simple way to getting approximately to the right place with a quick cheshbon. The imti ashana moberes. That's another, by the way, that's a loose canon that the Rambam didn't mention before, but you have to add. For example, Allah Zayin, Allah Zayin, Aresha not seen later. Like we just mentioned, the Rambam wrote this in year 4,930 from creation. That's very important because now the Rambam is dividing everything. You had 259 full cycles of 19, and now you are in the 9th year of the 260th machzor from the creation. That's what should take a calculator. That's what it is in year 4930. What's in the Chodesh Nisan Nikba Ba B'Chamisha, and Kufas Nisan will be B'Chamishi. Well, if he Shahoisa Shana Zut Shis LaMachzor, Yeh Hashana Magmura is Shmoina. K'Tiklach L'Chashana Mehem Achadas Yom. Achadas Yom is you get approximate, and you're making 11 times 8. These are approximate numbers, so you're going to have 88. Toisav Shiva Harei HaKoil Chamisha V'Tishim Tashlach HaKol Shloishim Shloishim Nisharu Chamisha Yomim. So Kishatascha Limnis Chamisha Yomim from the Chodesh Nisan, which this year that Rambam writes was on a Thursday. Okay, so then you have Friday, Shabbos. You have to add. You're going to come to Yom Sheni, Monday, the 5th. Kfar Yodano. Now the Rambam says we know that it's really not on Monday; it's on Thursday. We're off by 3 days. Exactly. That's the point that Rambam wants to make. that it's only approximate number. Which is Taka the Yom HaTkufa. Nim says, just to know that Kufas Nisan B'Shana Zu was when the 8th day of Chodesh Nisan. And it's good to know that. You know what we see, Kevin? I know what we mentioned, the reason to make a leap year, we're going to use Rav Ado, but this is important. It's important for us, for the vernal equinox to be before Pesach, or the latest the 15th. And that year that the Rambam wrote the Sefer in year 4930, when was it? It was on the 8th of Nisan, which is fantastic. And Allah Ches, Zeshor Manu, place of Yoim, Achar Yoim, Acha Tegia, Loyem at Kufa. Lo'olam, in this latter, second, simplified cheshbon of knowing the day of the month of the Tkufa, you'll have to adjust it, but it should never be, like we mentioned, that you have to adjust it more than 3 days. And then Rambam writes, you should know you made a mistake. And now we're moving on to the 10th chapter. And we already gave the introduction on the 9th, which is also for the 10th. In other words, this is amazing. The Rambam wrote the cheshbon based on Shmuel, and the way we're explaining it is because halacha l'maisa, we paskin like Shmuel, Aleph, Saint Alamat Levracha, Beis, the Birchas Hachama. The whole cheshbon that every 28 years you are going exactly to the same place, exactly, that only works, think about it, according to Shmuel. According to Ravada, it's not going to be every 28 years. It's going to be much more than that. Because once you start having fractions, if ever, to come to exactly the same place, think about it. Every time you have fractions, it takes much longer to round off the number. So let's go. Perek HaSidi. Here we have 7 halachas. Says the Rambam, halacha aleph, shnas achama, lemi shuhu oimer. According to those, which is Rav Ada, that it says that it's less than the quarter. It's not 365 and 6 hours. He holds that the sun is moving a bit quicker. That's the way to word it. In other words, the sun comes back to the same place. It doesn't need the 6 hours. It already achieves it in less than that. And that's Mechachme Yisrael. Oimer, which is, now listen to this, guys, 365, not 6 hours, less, 5 hours. Shameyos v'shiva v'tishim chalakim, 997 chalakim. And now we are introducing a fraction of a chelik. We never had a fraction of a chelik. Up until now, guys, we had days. A day is 24 hours, and an hour is divided into 1,080 chalakim. Now we're going to divide every chelik into a rega or regoyim. People say, rak rega kememra. The Gemara in Brachas that Hashem Kaviyachal gets angry every day in the time of a rega with that simon of the rooster, whatever it is. Now we're going to see how much is a rega, and here you have to break it down further. And 48 regoyim, 365, 5 hours, 997 chalakim, and 48 regoyim. You see how detailed this number is. It's a lot more precise. V'harega echad. And how much is a rega? A rega is 1/76 portion of a chelik. Echad mishisha v'shivim chelik. Now I want to say like this, guys, before we go inside. The inside will be very easy. You know what the advantage here will be? Just to know, we're not doing it for the advantage. On one hand, things are much more complicated. Today with a calculator, I don't think it's more complicated. You just add another couple of numbers. But imagine before the calculator, when you start adding 1 year on top of the other, it's many, many more numbers. There are more fractions. But something amazing will happen now. Going back to Perek Vav Halacha Yud. We, for many cheshbonos, we join 19 years together because every 19 years, all of these fractions almost perfect themselves. Up until now, both in Perek Vav and today in Perek Tes, when we said that after every machzir, you have to still correct the 1 day and something. There is something that has to be corrected. According to this cheshbon, there is zero excess after every machzir. It's amazing. The 19 years is b'diuk in the same place. Like we mentioned, it will not work for Kiddush Hachama, Birchas Hachama. For Gavalt. According to Ravada, you don't have that precision every 28 years at all. But that we pass like Shmuel. But as far as the Machzorim are concerned, Like there's a Maila and there's a Chesanim. There's a Chesanim that it's a lot more fraction. There's a big Maila that every Machzor, everything is perfectly back to the same place. Now, Lafi Cheshbon Zeh, Tia Toisefer Shnas HaChamal, Shnas HaLevana, Asara Yomim, Va'achad Ve'esrim Sha'a, Umeya Ve'echad Ve'esrim Chelek, and Ushmoina Ve'arbayim Rega. Now we have to go into much greater fractions. The difference between 12 lunar months and 1 solar year. That's a different number. Similarly, Yud, Chaf Aleph, Kuf Chaf Aleph, Memches. You got it? Yud is Yamim, Chaf Aleph are Sha'ois, Kuf Chaf Aleph are the Chalakim, and the Mach are the Regoim. Now, here the Rambam writes what we just said. Trying to klal. The Maila, the advantage of using this more precise number, yeah, it's more fractions. But every machzor will not leave any there'll be nothing left over. There won't be any toisefes. Ela b'chol machzor mehem yishlemu yemei shnei achama im shnei alavana apshut v'amboris. As long as you have, like we mentioned, 12 pshutois and 7 mu'ubarois, you're going to come to the same place. Gavaldik halacha beis bein kol kufa l'kufa. Fi cheshbon zeh. Now let's go the same thing as we began in the 9th chapter. Every year has 4 tkufas. Tkufas Nisan, tkufas Tammuz, tkufas Tishrei, tkufas Teves. Is the sun in the beginning of Teleh? Is the sun in the beginning of Sartan? Is the sun in the beginning of Moisnaim? Is the sun in the beginning of Gedi? Well, you have to take this number now and divide it into 4. Again, a lot more fraction. Is the 91 days are the same, but now it's going to get fun. Usheva Sho'ois. V'chamesh meyas v'tisho asar chalakim and ve'echad u'shloishim rega. Similarly, zat kit la shatei dat kufa. These al pi pshat, al pi kabbalah. I don't know. This is pashat mnemonics. You know, today we have the book. They had everything bal peh. That's how they remembered it. Shatei dat kufa minat kufais. Emasai hoisa. Same concept. Once you know any one kufa, you'll know all the other future tkufas. It's simple, Kevin. If you know when something happened, if you know the time that it takes to come to the next one and to the next one, keep on adding it. The only thing is we get to jump 19 years. The same thing, not to have to add year by year by year, just to have, like the Rambam wrote this, like we said, in the 260th 19-year cycle. So at least you don't have to do it 4,930. You get to do it, 259, and now you only add in the 19th machzor. Like we had in the previous chapter, right? The first year of creation, before the Moilad of Nisan, but how much before? Teisha sha'ois, v'sheish meyes v'shnayim b'avoim chalakim, Simulahem, Qatar, Ma'ab. And how do we get to that? Because the Moilad of Nisan was on Yom Revi'i. Guys, we had this. Yom Revi'i, 9 hours, and Tafresh Mem Beis Chalakim. And again, we mentioned in Pedic test, there's no machloikas over here that the Rambam holds that the Kufa, the first Kufa of Nisan, was in the beginning of Wednesday, right? Which was when Hashem affixed the heavenly bodies in the heavens. And the Rambam, it happened 6 p.m. for the sun. For all of them. Shall call Machzoid, Moilad Nisan. Since according to the Rambam, the Machzor of 19 years brings the sun and the moon back exactly to the same relative position. Exact. There is no adjustments that are needed. So every 19 years, Gavaldik, prior to the Moilad, you're going to have the Tkufa. How much prior? Teisha Shois, the Sheish Miyas Ushnai V'Avam Chalakim. Halacha Dalek Shetei Dat Kufas Nisr Shon and the Shoinim and Amachzer. But that's only every once in the 19 years. Now, Tachshu Meno, you begin to add for every Tkufa. Every year's 4 Tkufas. Echad Tishim Yoim. Usheva Shois V'Chamesh Miyas V'Tisha Asay Chalakim and V'Echad Rishim Rega. To know that year, every tkufa, atzayf hamachs. Halachei, im tirtze leida. Masai tiyat tkufas nisan. Lefi cheshbon zem. You don't want to know when the tkufa of Tammuz will be. You want to know when the tkufa of Nisan will be. And this, by the way, and halachei is when we paskin like Rav Ada, like we mentioned, in Pedic Dalet we learned that when the Beis Din will convene. to decide whether they're going to make this year into a leap year or not, even though they will only announce it Tishrei or later. But they'll know beforehand. The main factor, the factor that stands alone, right? The ripening of the barley has to be together with the blooming of the fruit trees. You need both of them, aside of the exterior factors. But just the Tkufa, we cannot allow for the Tkufa of Nisan to be on the 16th. So we paskin like Rav Ada, and it can make a difference. Using Shmuel's numbers, you'll have another date. Okay. Because that's first you jump 19 years. But now, what year are you in this current 19-year machzor? Right? You have to add the remainder, and that is like we mentioned, Yud Chaf Aleph Kuf Chaf Aleph Mach. The Kabbats call it a goyim. Now, every time you hit 76 regoyim, so you zero out that rega, you throw it to the higher number, right? This concept we had it many times already. So the Kabbats call it goyim halakim. And all the halakim, once you hit 1,080 halakim, you throw it into an hour. Every time you have 24 hours, you throw it into the day, right? And you have to subtract from this number Teisha Shoyes V'Sheish Mias V'Shnayim V'Armim Halakim. Why? Because that's the difference between the first Kufa and the Moilad. V'hanishar tashlichai chachi levana, v'hanishar she'em boi chadosh levana, toisev alav amal nisan rosh Hashanah, v'rega she'gia minyan boi, tiyat kufas nishal rosh Hashanah. Gewalt, halachi vav. Manali advarim. Says the Rambam, okay, I brought both opinions. When do we paskin like whom? The Rambam says, I hold, shal cheshben tkufa zu, this is what we keep on mentioning, that for the cheshbon of Rav Ada, soimchin le'inyan ibor Hashanah, be'esha bezin matzoi, she'ema abrim, and we said Zman, the Zman itself was three factors, and from the three factors, the most powerful one is the Tkufa, Lefisha Cheshben Zeh, Hu Ha'emes Yosser Min Harishon. Why do we pass in that way? Like we mentioned before. You know what the Emes is? The Emes is that it's even more detailed than Ravada. But there was no halachic reason to go there. So we simplified as much as we could. But when it comes to this kufa, we have to follow the more complex. The simple one of Shmuel. And the astronomers don't follow that for their own reasons. They're navigating in the ocean. There you have to have greater precision. So just like they use the more precise, the Rambam writes that for the kufa, le'ibur shana, we follow Rabbah. Halacha, the final halacha of this chapter, halacha Zajac. The cheshbon shtei hatkufos elu should be anu darkam. The Rambam writes both of them. Hakol b'kiruv. They're only approximate. Number one, the Rambam is writing clear. Even avada is not exact. And number two, now we're going to speak more about this number two in the next payday. That's only if we are looking at the movement of the sun. How long does it take to make a full rotation without thinking about how it appears on the earth? We're not talking about the earth. We're talking about the sun vis-a-vis the sun itself. Amiti means our emes, how the movement of the sun appears to us. Be different numbers. Tia kufas nisan bizmanam elu b'chmay shnei yamim koydem shtei atkufa sheyetzu mecheshbon zeh. There's going to be a difference of 2 days, and we're going to have that cheshbon and Perek Yud Gimel once we explain the goyva hashemish, as God willing we'll get to. Makes a huge difference. Just to say the words, the fact that the center of the circle of the galgal of the sun is not where the earth is. The earth is not in that center. Bein becheshbon mishem mechashev revi hayoim gamur. Bein mishem mechashev lepachos min revi hayoim. Sai Shmuel, Sai Rav Ada will not explain how is it that the sun appears to us the way it appears to us, because when we're speaking about what is happening here in Olam Hazeh, which is called the Mahalech or Amiti, that's not Bechlal, what we spoke about in the last two chapters. Not relevant for all of the three dinim. When to say V'sein Talamat L'bracha, when to do the Birchas Hachama every 28 years, when will the Beis Din Hagadol move, add the Ibur Shana, because the Tkufa, because the vernal equinox is on the 16th of Nisan or later, For that, you only have the Mahalach Hamtzoi. And later, we're going to learn about the Mahalach Amiti. And with this, we conclude the 10th chapter. And now, today's third chapter, we're going to start Perek Achadosar. Now, you have to understand the following. Everything we learned until now, beginning with chapter 6, like we said, 6, 7, and 8, which Mamish tells us how the calendar was made. And it's made only al pi cheshbon, there's no re'iyah. And what we learned today, the 9th and the 10th chapter, which is Pasha to know the movement of the sun, to know when the Kufa will be, or each one of the 4 Kufas are going to be. Let's go back now to the beginning of the series. What was the beginning of the series? Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that the ideal way to affix a calendar is to have 2 people testify they saw the new moon. Now you have to take a step back for a moment. What's the step back for a moment? Of course, if no one would learn any of this part of the Torah, God forbid, people would not know this. If 2 Eidim that are kosher la'edim, they see the new moon and they testify, you're good. You rely on the testimony. But Hashem commanded, even when we're mekadosh al pi re'iyah, Hashem gave a mitzvah for the Sanhedrin to know the movements of the moon, to know the movements of the sun. And not only the Mahalach Hamtzoi, but the Ikid is now the Mahalach Hamit. To know when the moon is seeable. The Sanhedrin has to know that prior to the coming of the witnesses. So like this, when they come and they testify, they already know where it should have been seen, in what direction it should have been pointing, like we mentioned. How thick will the crescent be? Is it going to be to the north or to the south of the sun? Even though obviously it's going to be visible only after the sunset, but will it be to the north or to the south? How high up in the horizon? All of that are pieces of information that they have to know independently, and now they have how to interrogate the witnesses. And with that, and now as an intro, which we really, the real complicated cheshbonos will be chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. The Rambam gives Perek Achadosar. A lot of what we're going to be learning inside here, God willing, we're going to be demonstrating as our intro to chapter 12. Chapter 12 was already filmed together with Rabbi Lush, using his globe, using his charts. But this is going to be the final chapter that we won't have any of these props, but it's going to be self-explanatory. And let's dive into it together. The first of the 17 halachas of the 11th chapter. Says the Rambam, Lefisha marnu b'halachas elu, shebeis din hoye machashven b'digduk, and v'yoidim im yero hayoreach, they know whether the moon is seeable, whether it could be seen or cannot be seen. Yodanu, we know, says the Rambam, shkol misherucha mechayin, whoever has a proper spirit, the liboy ta'ev, the divrei hachachmos, and one whose heart desires words of wisdom, one who wants to probe, to grasp these mysteries, someone who has such an inclination will have a desire, a taiva, to know what we're going to learn. And guys, you're going to see this. Some people are so attracted to this. There's a reason for that. A person who is inclined to go deeper, in other words, he's not content with bina, a person who wants to develop one's chachma, hand in hand will be a taiva to learn this part of the Torah. He'll want to know how all of these heavenly bodies move. For us to know, that's a big secret that Rambam is writing over here. Or let me word it in another way, that when people dive into this chachma, that's one of the pathways they're going to get to real chachma. So it's called the Soid Ha'ibor, not only for the reasons we mentioned in the previous chapters, that it was never written down on Torah Shabbat Peh, for there not to be a machlokes when to make the calendar, but this somehow is the link between Nigla the Torah and the Soid of Torah, astronomy. Halacha beis. Darkei HaCheshbon, yesh be machlokes gedolos ben Chachmei HaGoyim HaKadmonim, ben Chachmei HaGoyim HaKadmonim, shechokru al Cheshbon HaTkufos v'Gematriyos. You have to know math calculations, you have to know geometry calculations. And great people made mistakes here. And certain things were hidden from them, and because of that, was born to them certain doubts. There are some people that did a tremendous job, but they were wrong. What happened was that they were tzolol b'mayim adirim. They plunged into mighty waters. You're doing that for a reason, and they came up with nothing. They came up with a shard. You plunge into the water, so they come up with a pearl. But many people, the Rambam says, so and Allah Gimel, and as time went on, and after a lot of examinations, some people at least figured it out. The Rambam is writing what was figured out. Not only are there certain things that we figured out on our own, but there are many things that we receive from the Chachamim. And there are many proofs that were never written down and they're not known. Says that Rambam kosher be'enai. I am fit in my own eyes, not in an arrogant way. Very few people were able to do what the Rambam did, if anyone. Levoid darkei cheshbon said, I'm going to bring down these cheshbonis. Why? Someone whose heart spurns him to approach this malacha, dive into the next few chapters, and the Rambam is giving you the system. Halacha dal. None of this should be treated lightly because it's not needed halachically. And indeed, until the coming of Mashiach, it's not needed halachically because now we have a calendar affixed by Hillel the Minor until the Sanhedrin is going to be reconvened. Because it's not just about knowing. It's she'elu hadarachim es darachim rechoikim va'amukim heim. This is a part of the chachma that God gifted to every human being that is going to be developed through learning this. V'hu soid ha'ibur shoya chachamim hagedolim yoidim oisam ve'enam oisam l'chol adam elo l'smuchim nevainim. And how lucky are we? You know, the silver lining of Golus, that the Rambam is giving it over to people even like us. Avol zeh cheshbon shemachashvim bizman she'ein sham beizin l'kvaya re'iyah shemachashvim hayoyim. The cheshbon that the Rambam taught in chapters 6, 7, and 8, the Rambam writes a child can do that. Even a child that's in cheder will be able to figure it out after 3 or 4 days. You're kidding? We learned it together in an hour and a half. And I know more should be learned, but that's what he's writing. That if you're in cheder, you're a 7-year-old, you can figure it out in a couple of days. But that's not going to be the following chapters, cannot be figured out by a child in cheder. Halacha 5. Shema yizbein chacham. Someone who got his information from non-Jewish sources, and they're going to see the numbers that I'm going to give, and they're going to say that the Rambam, I was off a little bit. They're going to find that I was slightly imprecise. The Rambam says, yes, I'm being slightly imprecise. And like we mentioned, as the intro to chapters 9 and 10, the goal of all this is to know when will the moon be seeable. So there's going to be a certain level of high precision that's not needed. And if it's not needed, they're not going to write it down. The Yalal Datam, someone might think that I forgot about something. Something was concealed from me. And I don't know that there's a more precise number. The Rambam says, no, I know what you know, and I'm telling you right now, Al Yalal Zaldati. Don't think about it. Don't allow that to go into your mind. Ella kol davar. This imprecision won't make a difference. The goal is to know when the moon is seeable. So if there's going to be a greater precision that won't make a difference, I'm going to ignore it. Wow. Rambam writes 2 things. First of all, it might not be negaya. Second of all, there's so many different types of movements. As we're going to see when it comes to the chapters that deal with the moon, particularly chapter 17, it's so complex, so complex, that sometimes you have to add something on one side, but for other reasons, you have to subtract it from the other side, so it equals itself out. So the Rambam says, sometimes I purposefully did not take a certain movement into account because there is another opposite movement that canceled this out. The Rambam is writing, he's not giving us all of the information. Some of it is remaining aside. He's giving us a lot of information, that which is needed to know whether the moon is seeable. As we'll speak out so much later. in so many movements. You gain here, but you lose there, and they can equal each other out, as we'll see many examples in the 17th chapter. It's going to come out to the emes anyways, vis-a-vis what it looks to us by the mahalach or amiti. It makes it simpler without making your. In other words, if you gain one and you lose one, it's much easier cheshbon not to speak about the gain, not to spek about the loss, because you're going to end up in the same place. I don't want to confuse you. Now let's begin. Now the Rambam is giving the basic introductory points. The first thing you have to know, the first thing is, and whether you're trying to know for the purposes of what, wow, we are learning it for, to know when the moon is seeable. For any other astronomical reason, why are you learning it for what? Elohim. You have to know like this, that the Galgal, every sphere, we are dividing it into 360 degrees. And we spoke this out today in the beginning of chapter 9, and I thank Kevan, whoever's looking here on the Zoom, has a great picture. Whoever's using the Rambam of Rabbi Evan Yisrael, Rabbi Steinsaltz, has a simple, great picture. Kol mazel or mazel takes up 30 degrees in the 360. The first mazel we will always use as mazel telah. We're going to put mazel telah on top of this. V'chol milo, now every degree is comprised of 60 chalakim. Guys, now you have to halk up, because we use the words chalakim, if you remember, when we were speaking about, in the previous chapters, when we were speaking about zman meaning you have, time is comprised of days, hours, chalakim, and we had in the previous chapter the goyim, but there was another fraction, right? Every hour has 1,080 chalakim. When we're going to use the chelik going forward, don't confuse a chelik with the other. Now we're speaking about not zman. Until now was zman. Now we're speaking about makom. Zman u'makom. We're speaking about space. That a sphere occupies 360 degrees. Every degree is made out of 60 chalakim, which is a 60th of a degree. We're not done yet. And every chelik is made further out of 60 shniyos. And every shniya is made out of 60 shlishiyos. Wow. So it's 60 and 60 and 60 and 60. That's what we're talking about. If you ever hear, when we're going to be going forward, that star is, and you're giving a location. You're saying that it's in the 70th Maila, and in that 70th Maila, 30 chalakim and 40 shniyos. What are we talking about if we want to translate that using mazalois? Very simple. If every mazal is 60, is 30, so the first mazal of Teleh is 30. The next one is called Shoir. From Shoir till to Umim is another 30. That's 60. You understand? So if you are in the 70th degree, you are in the mazal of Sarta. It's simple. I'm sorry, I take it back. Mazal to Oimim. It's in the mazal to Oimim because it's Teleh Shoir to Oimim before the Sarta. But we're b'chatzi milas achas asrei mazal zeh. Why? Because since mazal Teleh is 30 milas exactly, and the mazal of Shoir is by exactly 30, so you have 10 more. Eser milas umechzim mazal to Oimim. Barboim shniyos b'chatzi amilo acharoi. Halacha 9 v'chein im yetzim okoyim b'galgal. Someone says, that star is in the sphere, the shloish meis ve'esr milas. Where is that? Teidash akoychem zeh b'mazal deli. Be'esr milim ma'aloboy. V'alderech zu b'chol aminyonos. Now the Rambam is going to give you the names of the mazolos. The Seder HaMazol is Kachu, Teleh. Now guys, also appreciate that we are going always from west to east. Remember the movement. We're going from west to east. Teleh, Shoir, To'imim, Sartam, Aryeh, Psula, Moisnayim, Akrov, Keshes, Gedi, Deli, and Dogim, Lahoir. That Dogim take plural, I know To'imim, but the Dogim is plural because you can have two others. Halacha Yud.
All right. After how many degrees? After how many degrees do we say it has the influence of another mazal?
Every 30 degrees.
No, but I'm saying it's in between. What do we say it's being influenced?
There's no in between. It goes straight from one into the other.
Got it.
Halacha Yud b'chol hacheshbonos kulam. As we had the concept, we had this in Pedig Vav Halacha test. In other words, when you have these little fractions, every time you conclude a cycle of 60, so you have 60 shlishiyos. So then you bump it up to a shniyos. You bump it up to a chelik. You bump it up to a degree. Like shetois amino chamingen. The kabitz kol min aminoi. Hashniyos am hashniyos. V'chalakim am hachalakim. V'maylos am hamaylos. V'chol shet the kabitz hashniyos shishim. So that's it. So you zero that out and you throw it into the chelik. Tosam loisim chelik yacham v'tois al hachalakim. The moment you have the halakim, which is 60, then don't speak about that number. You don't have 61 halakim. You're back into a degree. And when you add milos on milos, the moment you hit 360, you're back to 1. No, we're going in a sphere. We're not going linear. You don't keep on adding. When you're making circles, when you come back to the same point, you're back to square one. Only that is what's going to be counted. These are the rules you have to get used to when we're going to go into the later chapters. When you decide to subtract, so when people know this, people who learn, in Cheder when you're young and you learn how to subtract, right? You cannot subtract a bigger number from a smaller number. Remember that? You cannot subtract a bigger number from a smaller number. So when it comes to numbers, I don't want to confuse people. The rounded number is 10. Right? If you remember making these cheshbonos the way I was taught, at least when I was a kid. So you have a smaller number on top and you have a bigger number on the bottom. So here the Rambam is going to do the same system, but don't forget, you're not using 10, you're using 60, because it's 60 shlishiyos that make one sheni. 60 shniyah make one chelik. 60 halakim make one mile. So let me word like this. If the second number is greater than the first, how do you do that? How do you subtract? You don't have enough in the first from which to subtract. Not a problem. Because you're speaking about a sphere. Just add. How much will you add? I'll tell you how much you can add, Kevin. If you're speaking about degrees, add 360. Something is in the sky in degree 30. Well, if you have to subtract anything bigger than 30, then don't call it 30. Call it 390. Because 30 and 390 is the same thing. Because every time you make a full circle, you're 360 degrees. So add first 360 miles. Now you have a very big number. And from that big number, you subtract. And the Rambam gives a practical example. We're going to go quickly, but it's mamish simple to chab. The Rambam is going to give you as a fraction number. And the chamishim chalakim and the arboim shniyos, right? 250 degrees, 50 chalakim, 40 and 100. 40. I'm sorry. Simanim reish nun mem. If you have to subtract it from 100 degrees, how do you subtract 250 degrees from 100 degrees? You can't. But from 100 degrees. And the essence of chalakim u'shleishim u'shniyah simanim kachal kuf chaf lamed. I'll tell you what the Rambam says. Simple solution. Add to this little 100 degrees. It's not 100 degrees. You understand? You're going to add 360. Add to the 100 another full 360. So now, Gavaldik. Now what are you doing? You're subtracting the 250, etc., from 400, not from 100. Yeah, Milos Arba Meis V'Shishim. Again, any time in this equation, when the second number is greater than the first, you add a whole unit. So take away, take one, add it to the next. And now, so now you have 90 shniyas. Now you're good. From 90, you can subtract 40. So now you have 50 shniyas. You always have to give from the larger to the smaller. And the largest is the degree. If you have nothing in the degrees, add 360. You can always add 360. Now you're good. Now you can deduct 50. So you're short tisha v'esem chalakim. So now you're short Mosayim Tesha v'chamisha miles v'nimsa hashaor. So now that's going to be the bottom line. That how will you subtract 250 degrees, etc., except from the 100, you'll end up with 259. Next, halacha yud gimel. Hashemesh v'hayoreach, the sun and the moon. And v'chein she'ar hashiva kirchavim. Really, it's the other 5 kirchavim. We spoke out today, before Perek Tes, that we in the Torah, we take into account the detailed shiva koich v'leches, and then everything else is what we call we're going to call the Galgal Hashmini. Remember that? Just listen to the intro to the 9th chapter. And then we project everything in this Galgal Hachi. Every star, if you're not asking how it appears here on earth, that's called the Mahalach Hamiti. We're not talking about that. First, its own movement is always consistent. Consistent means it doesn't go quicker, doesn't go slower. That's one of the ways that we see the koyach of the Ein Sof, that it's constantly moving at the same speed. Ein boy loy kalus, loy kvedus. Elo, kamoy mahalcha hayoyim, same exact speed of today will be the speed of yesterday, will be the speed of tomorrow. Kamoy mahalcha b'chol yoyim v'yoyim. All of this is, guys, we'll get familiar with these words. It's only b'mahalach hamsoy. In the mahalach amiti, from our perspective, the speeds will change. V'galgol, another thing. This will be a huge thing. Even though all of the Shiva Koich V'leches has the earth in the center, that I'm going to learn later about the Galgal of the Yoreach, that the moon has really 4 Galgalim. The earth is only in the center of 3. The Galgal HaKatan, upon which the moon is moving, does not have the earth in the center. It doesn't bother me now, because now we're putting all of the Galgalim of the moon into one general Galgal HaYoreach. And the earth will be in the center. But, says the Rambam, don't think center means exactly in the center. Many Galgalim that have the earth in the center has the earth off its center. And as we'll explain in the intro to the next chapter, Perek Yud, that will make all of the difference. Why we have to have a Mahalach Hamsoy and a Mahalach Hamiti. And halacha Yud Gimel, lefikach, im tarech Mahalach Kolech Hamehem, legalgal makav v'so'ilam, shoros v'msoy, shgalgal mazonois. If the question is, where is a certain star vis-a-vis the mazolis, not vis-a-vis the earth? You're going to have one type of movement. When you're looking at planet Earth and you're looking, well, where's the sun vis-a-vis the mazolis? How quick did it move one day? How quick did it move the other day? Which is what we call the Mahalach or Amiti. There will not be a consistent movement. There's going to be going quicker and going slower, as we'll explain. When we're speaking about each Galgal vis-a-vis itself, and or vis-a-vis the Galgalachi, which is the Galgal of the Mazolois, that's called the Emtza HaMahalach. It's very wrong to touch an approximation. It's such a wrong translation. It means that's called the Emtsoi. It's independent movement. It's independent movement, which is consistent. As far as our perspective is concerned, I'm sitting on the earth, I'm looking at the sun, and I'm looking at the mazolis. Where is the sun and what address? Sometimes it's going to move quicker, sometimes it's going to move slower. That is what we're going to be referring to the Mahalach Hamiti. So ultimately, when we have to know, Sanhedrin has to know if the moon is seeable or not, they ultimately have to know where it will be in the Mahalach Hamiti. But you can't jump to the Mahalach Hamiti. We'll explain this more in tomorrow's chapter. You have to first go to the Mahalach Hamtsoi. That has to be step number 1. And then you have to translate the Mahalach Hamtsoi to the Mahalach Hamiti. Halacha Tez Zayin. It's all ultimately to allow us to know when will the moon be seeable. Now I want you to know, as we pointed out when we learned the Perek Tes, that the Rambam clearly wrote Perek Tes in year 4930. Here the Rambam is writing in 4938. No, this was written 8 years later. The Rambam was amending it, and that's when he amended it. And by the way, lahavdol, not that we care, this by the Goyish years, that's year 1178. That is when this Perek was written. Shishnas Sheva Esrei, from the Machzor Mosayim V'Shishim, as we already spoke out in Perek Tes, there's a purpose. When you want to know the Tkufa of Nisan vis-a-vis the Moilad of Nisan. So every 19 years, you are almost back to the perfect number. You only need to make a small adjustment. So you have complete 259, and this is in the 260th Machzor of 19 years. Shishnas Shmoina. Here you go. This is in year 4938. Right, we're learning this in year 5783, just to have it clear. Tavshin Pei Gimel, Shishnas Teisha Shmoinim Aramis, Vel of L'Shtarois, was another cheshbon that was commonly used by the Yidden, and that was the year that Alexander Mugdan became a king, or at a certain point when he became a king, and that was the document, that was the number of the year that was written in documents, which is also the year 9 Teisha Umeya Ve'elef from the Churban by Yesheni. And the Zu Hashana, he Shana Kodim Oisim, Shnaso Iker Bechedron. The Rambam says going forward, whenever the Rambam writes the Shnaso Iker is referring to year 4938, or Lahavdil, by the common era 1000. Right, we are now learning this 2023. This is 1178. Final halacha of this chapter. Halacha is 17. Ulefi Shahadiyah. Another thing that we have to take into account when we're speaking about the Mahalachu Amiti. The Mahalachu Amiti, where you have to know on the earth, what is your longitude, which is west-east direction? What's your latitude, which is north and south? That will make all of the difference in the world. Whether for you'll see the moilad or you won't see the moilad. So these cheshbonos are only being made b'Yerushalayim and HaKodesh, and being that if you go east or west, north or south from Yerushalayim up until a point, that difference won't affect whether you're going to see the moilad or not. So the Rambam is going to give now, he's going to describe the longitude and the latitude of the world that we're going to be learning going forward, which is the Mahalachu Amiti. The Amiti, Benegeh Halacha, Benegeh the Sanhedrin, which is all around, Kimitzi and Teitzei Tzayra, about Yerushalayim and HaKodesh, the Beis HaMikdash, says that, let's read it inside. Even though the Rambam wrote that there were exceptional times that if the greatest Chacham was not there, they can do it outside. But normally it has to be done there. And therefore, Asinu Kol Darkei HaCheshbon Zeh, the Darkei HaCheshbon of Mahalachu Amiti is going to be built on the city of Yerushalayim. And distance of travel that Rambam writes 6 or 7 days, that Rambam is going to translate it in degrees in a moment. Why 6 or 7 days? Because if you live further, even though you'll see the moilad, you won't even come to the Sanhedrin. Where is that place? We're 32 degrees north of the equator. Now, if it's 32 degrees, so either side won't make a difference if you're very near, which will be at Chomish Shloishim at Tesha Ve'esrim. So Yerushalayim is 32 degrees. But the numbers that we are given will hold emes whether you're 29 or up to 35. And similarly, V'chein hu noita me'emtza yishuv keneged ruach ma'ariv, k'moi arba ve'esrim milas, we're 24 degrees west. So if it's 24, it won't make a difference whether you are in between the numbers 21 and 27. Gewaldig. That will be the ultimate goal of the Mahalach for Amiti. But before that, we have to start, God willing, tomorrow with the 12th chapter.
Thank you, Rabbi Zajac.
Now we are really opening this up.